Welcome, everyone. I am just delighted to have Jamie McHugh with us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jamie and then have him share his wealth of knowledge. Jamie McHugh is an MA, a master somatic movement therapist, and an interdisciplinary artist. He's the creator of Somatic Expression, body wisdom for modern mind. He's also the creator of Nature Being Art, abstract contemplative photography of the natural environment. Jamie, I am so glad you're here with us today. I look forward to this discussion and hearing more about somatic expression and nature being art.
Thank you for having me here, Martha, and thank you to the Shift Network for sponsoring this wonderful summit. So much to say, so much to share, so let's jump in.
Okay, well, my first question for you is that I have had the privilege of being in your classes, exchanging somatic experiences in nature with you, and you have something you call the 5 technologies. I would love you to just share with us what those are.
So a little bit of an origin story. In 2000, I took off on a sabbatical after many years of teaching to really discover what is it that I have to offer to the world of somatic movement and the worlds of art and healing. And, I studied with different people and with Anna Halprin, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, Emily Conrad, with a traditional Pomo healer, Lauren Smith, with Marjorie Barstow, a teacher of the Alexander technique. So I really had a rich history and experience of all of these different streams of somatic movement, education, and therapy. And as I was, reading and reflecting, I realized that there's so much crossover between these disciplines, but that if I really condensed it down, there was really 5 essential somatic technologies. And those 5 are breath, vocalization, contact, movement, and stillness. So why those 5? I mean, those 5 to me feel like they're indigenous to the body. And I call them technologies. I used to call them languages or elements, but I realized we think so much of technology as being something that's outside of us, a tool that we need to use to extend ourselves, to extend our capacities. And thinking of these as technologies that are embedded in us by nature for our own self-regulation, for our own wholeness, for our expression, it's like, oh, this is how we extend our capacities from the inside out. And of course, because somatic movement is that orientation from the inside out, it made a lot of sense to me to think about these 5 as, okay, this is what we do. And when we combine them, that they're synergistic. So I'll just kind of run through really quickly. So breath being, of course, the breath of life. I like to think of it as we enter this planet with our first breath and we leave it with our last. So it's really our membership card on this planet. This is how we join Club Earth, right? And because it's automatic as well as voluntary, so I can shift and change my breath as well as it automatically operating, it gives me the possibility of accessing different qualities of being. And of course, many wisdom traditions have worked with the breath for millennia. Vocalization is simply the breath made visible as sound. So, for example, I like to think of a continuum from very introverted breaths, so like normal breath with no sound, a silent exhale. And to kind of diffuse what I call the wind through the trees breath. And then little by little, breath coming out more as with more velocity. And then, of course, when we get into vibration, and vibration leading into chant and song, we add a whole other dimension of inner tonicity, in the sense of that, as my teacher Emily Conrad used to talk about, that our bones are like tuning forks. And when we make vibratory sound and repeat it, and instead of thinking of bringing sound out, to direct it into the body and to feel the vibration, that we're letting vibration travel through the bones and energize us, as well as sedate us. I mean, that's the beauty of working with these technologies, is we can ramp up or calm down. Contact. Simply, my favorite little saying is, wherever we make contact with ourselves, the mind follows. So our attention can be very focalized with touch, or we can move attention with the way that our contact can swirl around us, can be like rain, can be with a little pressure and release. So there's so many different ways that contact can be used. And of course, once again, for millennia, people have used contact for healing. And you can even still see it today, in the Episcopal Church. They have hands-on praying on people, which I think is just remarkable and lovely. But it's that vestige of times past. And my teacher, Lauren Smith, in the Roundhouse, and this is, in reflecting on these 5 technologies for this talk, I realized that in the back of my mind, he was my connection to this long, old tradition that has, basically been eclipsed and disappeared. And so I was very fortunate that Anna Halprin introduced me to Lauren, and I had a 20-year relationship with him. But that in the Roundhouse, around the ceremonial fire, and he was an improvisational healer artist, in the sense he'd get people kind of moving, and they move around the fire, and then he'd sing one of his songs, and we'd sing the song while moving, and the clackers that we would use, and then at a certain point it's like, oh yeah, go put your hands on somebody's back and focus there. And he would just orchestrate this beautiful ceremony that was very intimate and utilized movement, voice, right? Contact. So he was the living embodiment of such a deep and beautiful tradition. And so in terms of contact, of course, is another way that we literally come back into contact with ourselves, right? We all know that saying, I feel so out of contact with myself. Well, touch yourself. It's a very direct way. Here I am. So contact, and then of course, movement. I mean, movement is really everything. And I sometimes think that, for me at least, movement arises out of kind of jump-starting the system with breath, with contact, with attention, with sensing, and beginning to respond to my inner ecosystem from a lens of pleasure and ease. One of the great things that really struck me years ago was reading Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist, and one of the things he said, if you look in nature, all organisms open towards pleasure and close towards pain. And I thought, oh, yes. And sometimes, in many kind of movement disciplines, and we're trying to get the movement right and this and that we're under duress. And what happens if there's a way to receive and to feel pleasure and follow that, because it's in that pleasure that we open to life in a very different way, and to ourselves, of course. And of course, stillness, the pause that refreshes. And I like to think of stillness being kind of like, we have punctuation. So just like we don't have like run-on sentences unless, you're James Joyce and writing Ulysses, that essentially a thought is encapsulated in a sentence and there's a period. So just like we can interject moments of stillness in our speaking so that we really land somewhere, those pauses in movement and that contrast allow us to kind of have that sense of figure ground. And then, of course, each of these elements we can highlight in different ways. So in the work I call embodied mindfulness, we are highlighting the stillness of our structure while just allowing other things to happen. Or in laying down and in doing deep rest work, highlighting the movement of the breath, but the structure being still. Etc., etc. All of these 5 combined together, and this is for me what's exciting, is because the modern mind is so busy. It's constant stimulation, so much going on, that sometimes it's just hard to settle. I know very often people are challenged with meditative practices because they're trying to watch their breath, meanwhile their mind's... And I know that, people say, oh, that's part of the practice. My experience is that if people don't feel a certain amount of success right away, they're not going to continue. So how can we honor the traditions of the past and yet at the same time be aware of contemporary human bodies and perhaps what they need to be able to access those states of being that these traditions have brought forward? So one of the things I like to say is that when you have all of these different elements cross-fertilizing, so for example, if I put my hands on my chest right now and notice the rising and sinking of my breastbone with each inhale-exhale cycle, or then I put my hands down on my belly and notice that movement. It's a very different experience than if I just try to focus my attention on the breath in my chest or in my belly. Because I have that physical contact, so I'm using another sensory capacity to focus attention. Oh, so I feel the movement of my belly. My hands are moving. I'm aware of my breath. And then if I just take a few extended exhales, release the breath out through the mouth. I hear the sound of my breath. I feel my hands moving. So all of these various things happening simultaneously are occupying the mind and directing attention inward. And it's like the great Zen teacher Shinrikyo Suzuki said, the goal of practice is not to empty the mind. It's to let the mind pervade the whole body. And I just think that is, yes, that's it. How do we become fully present in our bodies and in our relationships with these 5 technologies?
Oh, yes. Thank you for the notion of just filling the body with the mindfulness, maybe body mindfulness. You brought the word presence in right in this last sentence, and I would love you to speak more to your sense of presence, what you delight in, where the pleasure is in it, where people get misdirected, perhaps. What is presence for you?
Woo! That's a big question. Let's see. Well, let me just start with somatic presence is dependent upon our inner sensory mechanisms, our proprioceptors, our interoceptors, all of those things inside that let us know where we are in space, how much tone or tension we're using, our global sense of our bodies, and of course, beyond our skin. So, how we both occupy space internally and externally, and how in that presence I'm aware of when I'm holding back, when I'm pushing forward, when sometimes I'm just easily on my sits bones and right here, kind of in that beautiful sense of lining up with the gravitational field and really being here on the planet, which I think is really, for me more and more, that's my passion, which is how do we bring awareness to this idea that we are swimming on this remarkable planet, that we are inhabiting this very small field of oxygen. Our atmosphere is not very big, right? It's almost kind of like an outer membrane to the planet, if we were to kind of create like some kind of holograph from the inside out. But how are we more and more aware of our relationship to this living planet that becomes, in a sense, diminished by our preoccupation with so many different external things and goals, and that we are inhabiting this exquisite ecosystem. I mean, right now I'm looking out my window at my apple tree that's just big and beautiful with blossoms, and I go out each day just to hang out a little bit, just taking that delicious aromatherapy, right? Just apple pie, it's so sweet, and then the life percolating around it. The bees are coming back. There's more and more bird song. But for me, the presence that I'm interested in right now is attuning more and more and more to this outer landscape. Because sometimes our somatic focus can be pretty exclusively internal, and sometimes can be so much about the me, whatever the me is. And I'm really excited about thinking more and more and more about our outer connectivity and our receptivity to what the planet has to offer. And of course, for me, in terms of the work I do, the embodying nature work, is essentially taking these 5 technologies outside and, going through a cycle that I call witnessing, just receiving, just really letting attention just be there. So, for example, like the apple tree. taking at least 3 breaths and witnessing it. And then, as we know, the way we learn is through mirroring. So how can I mirror the shape of that? How can I take on the quality of that tree to become that, right? It's like Marshall McLuhan said, they became what they beheld. And that is so much part of our ancient lineage as human beings, that we took on the other, right? And which I think is incredibly liberating and very scary too, because there's that willingness to give over to that. And then from that mirroring, maybe I want to get really up close and personal, so to make contact with all different parts of my body. So whether it's my nose up in the flowers or my back against the trunk of the tree, which of course stimulates movement and stillness. And of course I can respond then. And this is part of the process that I love, is just responding means anything goes. So there's so many ways to respond. And so maybe a song emerges or a sound or who knows, and then resting. At a certain point when I feel like that relationship is done in this moment, just to stop, to rest. Yeah, so witnessing, mirroring, contacting, responding, resting. And I'm sure somebody else could really develop those more, particularly into relational work with other human beings. But I use this as a map for this relationship with the natural world and its landscape.
Thank you for that. I felt it. And I felt delighted when the responding was part of the being present. So that presence isn't always just, I'm in meditation, present in my environment, looking, but my movement is a way of being present. My responses are a way of being present.
Right.
And then I also remember a term we use in body mind centering that is maybe slightly different than resting, but feels related just along that continuum of responding to absorbing and resting. Like there's the absorbing of the sensory input, and then maybe even the absorbing of my own physical experience in the resting.
Sure.
Thank you for evoking that in me.
Yeah, that kind of, and sometimes I like to use the word resting also as just kind of checking out. And in that checking out, realizing it's like, oh, which is of course another way to absorb and integrate, but that really that awareness of I'm engaged and now I'm not engaged. And the other thing I want to kind of follow with is that idea of that moving is a way to be present and this is a way to be present. And it really brings me back to my first teachers of movement, which were children. When I worked in public schools doing artist in residence work and creative movement. And at that time, I'd been studying modern dance, and Nikolai had come and done a residency at the university. So I was really just hopped up on modern dance. And then when I went into these schools, I realized I can't teach these kids movement. I mean, they're just so present with their movement. I mean, this is a movement meditation. How can I help them be more aware of what they're doing, shape what they're doing, but really let them be the masters of their own dance? And for me, so I always go back to the sense of, yes, you're right. Very often we talk about presence. People think that I'm grounded and centered and I'm present. Right? But we can be present in whatever we're doing as long as the mind is pervading the body and, of course, trickling out into our environment. Yeah.
I'm sure you have a multitude of ways to speak to what you're talking about now, the multi-layered present moment, and then how this rest phase relates to, I've heard two terms, deep rest work And then also in your own description of some of your work, you talk about the scientific state of non-sleep deep rest. Might this be a place and time to talk a little about that?
Sure. So, non-sleep deep rest, NSDR. Some people would call it yoga nidra. And it's really been, it's a term that the researcher Andrew Huberman at Stanford has kind of coined, non-sleep deep rest. He says because there's yoga nidra, but there's also many other techniques. And what I found fascinating is when I came across it is that I had been teaching these series for a while of realizing, especially during the pandemic, teaching online, that people just needed to drop out. They just really needed to be guided in really deep rest, but navigating the deep rest with a certain wakefulness. So that's why we do a little sound vibration or bring focus to streaming attention or whatever the focus was, but just kind of allowing the gravitational field and the presence of really laying on the ground, letting moment by moment the tension, the tone to dissolve. And I just thought, isn't that great? Attaching ourselves to the planet allows us that really deep rest. And so I started to realize it's like, oh, when we commit to that, there is a subtext of I belong here. I am held here. I am safe here, which I think are such essential messages for all of us in this kind of rapidly changing world when things are just, we don't know sometimes what's up, what's down, and just to commit to the practice of lying down consciously. And Huberman found that, that this practice, and there's variations on it, of course, but that's the essential thing that you focus perhaps on your structure, on the points of contact on the ground, or you're focusing on your breath. But the idea is that you commit to at least 20 minutes of lying on the ground as opposed to sitting upright as a meditation. And he was noticing the work with how it enhances neuroplasticity and helps learning, like if you really focus on something for a while and then you take time to lie down. And so I love this sense of what I'd call the things those of us who are exploring these technologies, we know this from our own experience and from watching the impact on our students and clients. So I always love it when somebody comes along and gives it a name and a thing, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I can get on board with that. Another one that I came across the radar recently is something called physiological sighing. It just sounds so clinical and stuff. But essentially, what it is taking in a breath with a pause in between. So. And then releasing a slow breath. So it's like I call it a truncated breath, an interrupted breath. And what's fascinating is he was pointing out that that's what little kids do when they're upset and they're trying to kind of regain themselves. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So any of you who've been parents, have witnessed that many times, but that is how the organism begins to find its way back home. And so once again, I love what nature has to teach us. I love what children and infants have to teach us, because I would say they're the ambassadors of the body of nature. Before there's more and more enculturation, and we all learn the lessons of culture so we can fit in, adapt, et cetera, et cetera. But the body of nature, you see in the movement of children, the play of young children, the expression, the the poise, uh, the lack of inhibition about having a big belly. All those things, right? It's just right there. So physiological sighing, deep rest. And the last thing I want to bring attention to is this other research that found that 5 minutes of playing with your breath, making sounds. I mean, these people had repeating physiological sighing for 5 minutes, but I thought, well, that's kind of tedious. But that you can make sound for 5 minutes and that it is kind of more expedient than 20 or 30 minutes of mindfulness meditation. And why that made sense to me from my lens is, because there's a certain amount of agency. I'm not just watching the breath, I'm participating with the breath. And so that is going to really help me write my own prescription in the moment for what I want and need. So it's like I say, I'm kind of a research geek on the level of I really like to stay attuned to what's happening and kind of fold it into my understanding of what we are offering to the world. And the last thing I just want to say about that, and I always make this kind of disclaimer. I like to say to people, what we're doing is the weird work. This is just weird. Okay, so it's okay, right? It's like, because if you think about it, no one's older than 5 years old. We all want to play, we want to laugh, we want to be loved, we want to be seen. It's just, we're all 5 years old. So get over your bad self and let's just get down and be 5 and enjoy our adult selves in our child-blessed bodies. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just remembering, some of the themes of this conference are the kind of where emotions work with somatics into transformation. And just to be with the wisdom of that 5-year-old, that child that just is free with the emotions, free with the body, and maybe not happy, maybe not even wanting to be where they are, but accepting it and going with it, expressing in it is just such a model for the inner parts of ourselves.
Expressing it and moving on.
And moving on, letting it go. Wow. Yeah. I also want to share that when I was diagnosed with chronic Lyme, underneath it is also Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue. I just naturally, and it was partly because I had been told in the 80s that it was okay to meditate lying down by Eva Graf, one of the great holistic healers. And then also when Angeles Arian did her research of the Fourfold Way, when she said lying down in meditation is a healing place, it was like, okay, this makes sense. So a practice for me, and this also merges with body mind centering, was to just, I call it the rotisserie. That might be a little gross, but in any case, just lying down on each surface of my body. So my 20 minutes got broken up into 4 or 5 minute segments of just feeling that Mother Earth connection, that receiving of my weight into whatever surface I was in contact with through each surface of my body. And I can't tell you how helpful that was in getting me through that particular phase of this disease that supposedly is chronic.
And I'm really glad you highlighted that, because this is the thing that I think is really important for us as a society and as a field of somatic movement practitioners, is one of the traps, I think, of modern culture is more and more knowledge and more complexity. It's like we're on the complexity bandwagon. And yet, some of the simplest things are the most profound. It's like you said, your rotisserie activity, just that little bit. And that's what I sometimes think of as these five technologies and the practices I teach with the five, is they're like the stem cells of specialized activity. So if you can think of, people that use their hands for very skilled body work, right? Or people that use their voices for like really elaborate singing, or all these basics are all then turned into specialized activities. And sometimes we can kind of, lose the trees for the forest. Oh, I can't really bring my voice out because I don't sound like Mariah Carey, or, all these inhibitions around expression because we want to kind of jump from here to here without realizing it's just the act of expressing a breath, kind of related to that. I've got something I've got to get off my chest. Right? There's a wisdom in that of just sometimes letting your exhale out. And just like the 2-year-old or 3-year-old who likes to sing a little song to themselves, oh, you. And these ways of knowing are embedded in those five technologies. And so to give ourselves that permission to not only sense and feel, but to express, to bring forward, what is percolating inside. So there's that constant back and forth between the inner and the outer.
I'm having a lot of pleasure in just listening to the slowing down, to the feeling, but also to the activating. Sometimes we call it relaxed alertness. Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking about is that you also have this beautiful way of using your eyes to take in through a technology that is called the camera. And I want to make sure that we get some attention with that. And also that you have an experience to offer to people so that we get time for that. Before we go there, I just want to shout out, and you probably know about this work, the idea of rest as resistance. So you talked about the world and being overstimulating, highly complex, a lot of problems, that this very work that you're doing is such an antidote to problems. And the NAP ministry of Tricia Hersey is another brilliant configuration of just supporting what you're doing. So love to know where you want to go next. Would it be taking us into movement, perhaps? Or taking us into the five technologies in some way?
Yeah, I'd like to do a practice, but to first answer your question, because for me, it's a very practical application of somatic presence. So one of the things about taking photographs, particularly through a viewfinder, is it's really easy to kind of scrunch the body up, right? Or like if you're going in for a shot and, and I sometimes find that as I'm in the wide open field, kind of seeing what speaks to me, and then I'll contemplate it and I'll go in and I'll try different angles, that sometimes just to pause, take a breath, really relax through my back, so that I can not have a lot of white noise of all this gripping, and instead can just allow myself more and more time to focus. And so that for me is like really an application. And then when I feel like I'm done with that, to put the camera down, to move, to release, maybe to cast my eyes around or just let my body move so that I continue the flow of what I'm doing in what I like to call wandering. And I'd say that focus and wander is really the essence of my kind of artistic practice, but also of my somatic practice and how I teach, which is, you focus in and then you kind of wander. You see where that takes you and then come back in again, so that there's this sense of I can be following along on a path, and then I go off the path. Something catches my attention, and then it's like, oh, but I know my way back to the path. And so that kind of methodical moving along the path in a somatic practice, with the ability to then wander instead of, oh, is the guide going on to something? Am I going to miss something? Am I going to get it? It's like, oh, but I'm over here. This is a beautiful flower off the side of the path, and I'm going to take time looking at it, and I'll just dive back in. And so for me, that's really important as both an artist and as a teacher, which is to give that permission and space for people to really find their own way. Because I think with so many forms demanding obedience, and this is the method, and this is how you've got to do it, I think it really demeans our innate creativity, right? Our agency, our autonomy, our ability to be creators and not just consumers. And this is, I think, it's really easy in the way the marketplace is oriented and what is the next trendy thing, that we can all get sucked into that model and forget that, oh, we are embodying the history of our ancestors, not just their wounds, but all of our teachers in the past, who've brought us to this point, and many will come after us. And so whatever our work is, it is just another drop in this grand ocean. And so not to take perhaps what we do so seriously and dogmatically and pedantically, but to realize we are offering something of value, and that then it's really up to people to take it however they want. And for me, that talk about the gifting economy, like they like to speak of, it really is the gifting economy when we offer and then step back.
Beautiful.
So with that, I think this is a good time to go into practice, because I talked about focus and wander.
It's perfect. I would really love to experience it.
Okay. So I invite you all to draw your attention inwards. And just take a moment to notice your structure, the structure of your body sitting. And then just to activate a little bit through movement, so just shifting your weight a little bit side to side or forwards and backwards. Moving in any direction that feels good to you, that feels comfortable and comforting. And just you shift around a little bit here and there, noticing your sits bones, the points of contact between your pelvis and your chair. So they're just points of orientation. And then beginning to slow down, making the movement slower and smaller until you come to rest. Noticing your structure now, how that little bit of movement perhaps created a change, maybe it didn't, but just to notice the aftermath in the stillness. And now taking your hands and letting them come to rest on your belly in whatever way feels comfortable for you. So shifting attention from your structure to this moving process inside of you. So as you inhale through the nose, your diaphragm descends, putting pressure on your belly. So your belly expands, blossoms into your hands. And then as you exhale, the diaphragm releases and the belly settles. Inhale, diaphragm descends, pressure on the belly, belly blossoms. Exhale, diaphragm releases, belly settles. And you might notice that the duration of your inhale, how long it takes, impacts the size of the movement of your belly expanding. So experiment with that a little bit. Take in a short inhale, noticing a small movement of the belly. A medium inhale, a larger movement of the belly. And a really long inhale, a grand movement of the belly. And after you've tried that out a little bit, just return to automatic breathing as a place of rest. And every now and then, to do a quick release exhale out through the mouth. And notice how that impacts your belly. Breathing in through the nose. Quick release of the breath. And I always like to say, as a rule of thumb, try something on for 3 breath cycles. Gives you enough time to feel into it. And then just drop it. Return to ordinary breathing. So that you're not overstimulating your system with new information, but that you are gradually adding, experimenting, innovating. And once again, shifting your attention back to the point of contact between your hands and your belly. Noticing the quality of touch that you're using right now to make contact. And in this moment, do you want to make that contact a little more substantial or lighter? Perhaps do you want to coordinate the lightness of the touch with the inhale and the belly blossoming? And maybe a little bit of pressure, supporting the belly settling on the exhale. So play a little bit with your contact in relationship to your belly and the rhythm of your breath. And in this tender dance with your belly, with this second brain, with this gut biome, add any quality of touch, any movement of your hands on your belly. Maybe you want to make circles or lines, or begin to let your hands move away from your belly a bit and then land again. So it's really kind of a duet between your hands, your belly, and the space in between. And meanwhile, the movement of your breath either is an introverted or an extroverted breath, a breath that has a little sonic quality to it. The expression of your breath is like the soundtrack of your experience. And because our mouths are so connected to our belly, to that whole soft spine, the shape of your mouth and lips can undulate in different ways, shaping from narrow to wide, to large and small openings. And within all of this complexity, whenever you wish, feel free just to come back to stillness, automatic breathing, settling in your structure. So interjecting moments of stillness as you explore this interface between your hands, your belly, the movement of your breath, and of course the sympathetic response of your body's structure. And let's take a collective pause. Sensing into yourself, noticing the quality of your breath, the feeling of your structure. And this pause is an interlude for the last 5 minutes of this practice. So we have the breath, we have contact, movement, and stillness. The breath both introverted, extroverted. And as you open your eyes to take in this video, and as you let your breath and body be moved by what you see, to let yourself inhabit your own rhythm of movement and stillness, as you let these images wash over you as a delicious way to move from our interior into the outer landscape. And please enjoy your breath and body along the way as you witness, mirror, and respond to these images.
Jamie, I'm uttering thanks and gratitude. The kind of, whoa, thank you for this deep and nourishing experience and the sense of calm and ease that I'm feeling right now, and playfulness.
Mhm. Thank you so much for having me. It was a delicious encounter. And of course, your witnessing presence really allowed me to come forth. And that's what I love so much about our engagement, our conversations, is how we each lift up each other's creativity and wisdom. So thank you.
For me, when I think of Jamie McHugh, I think of this experience also outdoors. And another way to experience it, as you have with the video, is to visit his website. So, Jamie, would you tell us more about both of your websites and how to contact you, how you would like people to know about what you're up to?
Sure. So, my Somatic Expression site has a variety of writings on it, my calendar, events that are happening. I'm getting ready to go to Europe for 6 weeks, my first venture post pandemic. I haven't been overseas in 4 years. So I'm very excited to be working in France, Switzerland, and the UK outdoors with people, which is what I love. It's that time of year to get out. And then my other website is naturebeingart.org. And that is my photographic website, and also the videos that I've created, which are both a combination. Some are just image dissolves, slow image dissolves with ambient music to kind of induce the state of rest while being eyes open and taking in the world. And then also beginning to experiment with overlaying video on each other. And so really working a lot these days with perception and how this rhythm of movement and stillness and what we're taking in with our perception can really impact our bodies. So naturebeingart.org, somaticexpression.com. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. Thank you again from the depth of my microbiome through my heart and through my perceptual lens. This has been a great joy, and I'm sure everyone from Shift Network appreciates this moment.
Thank you.